Now we're here to talk about change, transformations. And so we're excited and thrilled to have this fantastic panel for the next 45 minutes or so to talk about transformational change, right? And I'm sure for most folks, we know change is hard. I'm sure your spouse maybe tells you that once in a while, you tell them, but especially in the corporate or business context, the ability to really shift the direction of an organization, right? Thousands of people, tens of thousands of people, even hundreds of thousands of folks across the industry is something in which it has been difficult for some, but also there are many lessons, I should say, over time that organizations have built to help kind of establish that success. And so we'll talk about this. I have the team here with Katie and Dolores, who are experts and seasoned across their field to really kind of give us some insights around transformational change. The one thing I'll acknowledge, right, is this is not a new term, right? I'm pretty sure every single person in this room has either been a part of a transformation or led one successfully or not, forced or, a bit kind of in your own volition. But we'll really kind of spend some time answering questions and just talking through what that ultimate journey looks like. And as the team mentioned, my name is Brooke Daniels. I am a partner at McKinsey in our New York office. I co-lead our distribution practice, serving distributors. And on any given day, I serve kind of a handful. My favorite distribution clients are certainly the ones in which I'm there on the transformation journey, whether it's the multi-year post-merger or the large end-to-end transformations. And I know some people might be laughing because every consultant says their favorite client is the one where you're spending multiple years on anything. But you truly sort of see the breadth, right, of that change over time. And so with that, let me allow the panel to introduce themselves, and then we can kind of jump into the first set of questions. So we start with you, Dolores?
Sure. Dolores Bauders, COO at SPARXiQ. I've been in the industry for over 30 years. Got my start in manufacturing and leading data-driven initiatives, including pricing and sales effectiveness. And for the past 20 years, I've been really focused on distribution and personally working with hundreds of distribution companies from all different industries, all sizes, helping them navigate change and transformation and really having lasting impact and change in their business. Brooke?
Great. I'm Katie Vu. I'm the Chief Financial Officer for Bunzl North America. Bunzl is a distributor of a variety of products from food packaging to PPE. We work across numerous sectors, including groceries, food service, agriculture, food processors, safety, retail. Globally, our annual revenue is around $16 billion in North America, is around 60% of that. I have been with Bunzl for over a decade, so I think 5 more years and they will start referring to me as the new girl, as things are in distribution. And this is my 4th role at Bunzl in a 3rd country. So pleased to be here.
Awesome. I think a breadth of experience we're excited about. And preparing for this, I actually wanted to read some of the most recent statistics on transformations, right? And I came across a survey that McKinsey did, funny enough, and it interviewed or surveyed a number of companies, I think it was nearly over 100, and asked them about how they experience transformational change. And this number may be familiar to some folks. And I'll read this and then let's start with the first question. So the reported failure rate of large-scale change programs still hovers at about 70%. So that basically means that 7 out of 10 transformations fail, according to the respondents. And then I guess some folks might say, what does failure mean, right? So this is a relative term sometimes. And failure, as the respondents had described, is the transformation itself achieved less than 50% of the intended goals. So that, they can be quantifiable goals, but they could be top line, often, it's margin, but less than 50% of those goals are achieved. Specifically, most of the respondents said it was about 35% of our goals were achieved in the transformation, which was sort of viewed as, for them, a failure. One level deeper, which is interesting, was where did you end up saying that the transformation failed? 25% of respondents said it failed before day one, literally before day one. And day one for them was we weren't aligned to the targets, they were not ambitious enough, they were too ambitious, the organization wasn't bought in, there wasn't clarity. That's 25% say it was before day one. The next 25% said it was in the planning phase. So we failed to plan well, we didn't have enough detailed initiatives, people to know where we were going, we didn't have the infrastructure set up for it. So half of them said the transformation failed before we even got started. And then this last group, which is I think an interesting one, said 20% of respondents said it failed after the transformation was over. And so what many respondents said was, hey, we actually grew the share. We actually, were able to achieve that EBITDA margin, but within 6 to 12 months, it was eroded because we went right back to the ways of working. We weren't able to sustain it. And those embedded cultures, right, were just so focused on the short-term gains that over time, they quickly disappeared. And so with all that said, I want to focus on the 30%. And so that's a tee up for the 30%. And so my first question, maybe we start with you, Katie. The first question is, when you've seen or been a part of a transformation that's been successful, what do you think some of the conditions of success have been?
So Bunzl is a really decentralized organization. We have businesses from $5 million to $5 billion. So what it meant is that I have had the privilege to see many different transformations in a variety of scale. And for me, I think there are two factors in each change. There's the fuel, and then there's the friction. And for it to be successful, you need more fuel than friction, right? And many, many times we focus a lot on the fuel. We think that our idea is the hero of the story, and we ignore the audience where the majority of the friction comes from. So there's a lot of the what at the start of each transformation, and for me, that's the, hey, we are doing this, and then less so focus on the why, where you would be able to remove a lot of the friction, and then the how. So I do think that, at the moment, right now, live, we've got two, I would call probably the most difficult type of transformation that as an organization we are doing. And the reason why I say it's difficult because it's compliance driven. So when it's compliance driven, you can't say, well, this is going to, really grow your market shares or grow your share prices. The why we're doing it is a much harder sell. And one project is going significantly more successful than the other, and the one more successful, surprisingly, is actually, to implement SOX into an organization, which I hope I'm going to hear some groans around the room. And it's really because we are really focusing on removing that friction, to understand where the friction comes from and make it as easy as possible for our audience, in this case, our internal stakeholders, to adopt it. While the other change, although sounds a bit sexier, it's a bit all about ESG, actually, there's not as much tools or not as much organization support to make it frictionless. So everything along the way is a bit of a drag. So really, for me, it's the focus has to be a lot on how do we enable people to understand the why and the how to adopt the change, and not just the what.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would agree. From what I've observed, the number one reason for a change initiative to fail is a lack of support from the top, from the leadership. And really, it has to be there from the beginning. And all along the way, participation, not in every meeting, but in the important meetings, showing that it's a valuable, important initiative, and also communicating not just the what and how, but the why. Mm-hmm. Very important that people understand, why are we doing this? What's in it for them? How is it going to affect them? Within the organization, what's changing, when is it changing, making sure that all of those things get communicated early and often, and having accountability as well as the metrics to really measure that accountability, holding people accountable. Those are very important attributes of a successful initiative, but really lack of leadership support is what I personally have seen to be the biggest issue.
Okay. And it's interesting because you mentioned also this comment of helping folks understand the why. And this is something I think about because I find with some of my clients, I feel like pre-COVID, there was a little bit more sort of a naming of the transformation. So like what's in the name? And you walk the halls and there'd be the big posters and it'd be, project, flight and aspire and growth and, all these fun and fancy names. And I think particularly in this world now, we're more hybrid. It's a little bit more disparate, which makes it like some more complicated. But I also think communication becomes more difficult and the clarity around it. And so I just wanted to know your view on the importance or even differences now around the change story, like how it gets trickled down, and not just with employees, but potentially with customers and others when you think about storytelling and communication around change.
I do think that for a change and transformation to be successful now in this more hybrid environment, it needs to be even more high touch. So a lot of the time you think, okay, well, I've got the big messages are out there, you've got buy-in from the top, and then that's it. My job is here, it's done. So for me, a transformation is effectively you're launching a new idea, and in a way, it's no different than launching a new product, right? You start at the end to identify the needs that you're trying to fulfill and bring it all the way back. And similarly, when you launch a new idea for your organization, there's a lot of that high touch for your audience to understand why is it that you're trying to launch that change. So the storytelling piece is very critical, and very similarly, all of the things that you would do when you launch a new product, like the early prototype, to make sure that you have early success story, early use cases, and then make sure that all of that you gather continuous feedback from as wide of an audience as you could. And that feedback has to be continuous, and also I think as part of your storytelling, having the roadmap of the transformation where we are trying to get to is really important. So we need to be a bit more high touch, and there need to be more of that consistency versus just hoping that, by being in an environment where you're surrounded by all the posters, people understand the importance of the change.
Absolutely. And the change, communication about the change really needs to cascade through the organization. It starts at the top with the leadership telling the story, but then it goes to the next level. And that level starts to tell more of the story, and so on until you get to the front lines and everybody is completely aligned with that message.
Yeah. No, I agree. And I think, there's this sort of other question around structurally when you think about driving the change, and there may be different, varying opinions around this of, what's kind of the role of any differences in organizational alignment, as you mentioned. So do I need a transformation officer, right? I've seen the historical view that sort of says the CEO leads the company, the transformation officer leads the change. He kind of comes in, he sets the tone. But what is your experience on the role of the TO, and has that evolved as well, over the years in terms of how effective that they are within the transformational journey?
I think there are definitely benefits to having the transformation officer, but I do think that the biggest potential downfall or pitfall of that is if the businesses, the commercial team don't feel like they own the transformation, they own the change. You need for them to be the person who feel like they're responsible for it, they're accountable for it, and they understand the why. The last thing you would need is, for an organization to say, well, transformation isn't part of my responsibility. I've outsourced it to the chief transformation officer. However, having somebody to help you with the collaboration, coordination across all the different functions, which is what you usually experience in a large transformation, is really helpful. So for me, it's more, do you have that project management skill set within your organization, within each team? Is that something that can sit in the center to help, but more from a project management perspective rather than actually to own the change? So I see that more as a tool to enable you rather than they're owning the transformation.
Mm-hmm.
And I think for a lot of mid-sized to smaller companies, they don't really have a transformation officer. It doesn't make sense, or they don't have the scale for it. And in that case, it really comes down to having someone who is a project manager who knows how to create a timeline, manage to that timeline, hold people accountable, have a sense of urgency, a regular meeting cadence, and just doing all of the classical project management. Very important to have that in any change management program.
Yeah, I agree. And I'd say, sort of based on our experience, the TO, it's often one tool in the toolkit, to your point, right? So relative to the aspiration, the discipline on the infrastructure in terms of initiatives, and the TO is there to help drive the change. I think also what I've seen is the TO does have a shelf life, right? They're sort of not meant to necessarily be around forever. And some folks have differences in experiences, but them coming in, being able to push the initiatives and the agenda, be a peer as they sit across with the executive team on the SLT, and the transformation itself, right, has a timeline. But then it's ultimately about the sustainment, and then when it's time to do it again, right? And so I've seen that work in a lot of places. And so let's, I think, shift a little bit to talk about ambition. It's our favorite thing to talk about it. I'd say as McKinsey and the firm, we're always saying, we can be more ambitious, we can push harder, we can go a little bit bigger. I think rule of thumb, and from what I've seen, is when you think about transformational change, thematic transformation. So if you're saying it's growth or it's digital or supply chain, particularly if it's a functional one, you may want to think about at least 20% of last trailing month's earnings, right, as the ambition. If it is a large end-to-end where you're going across functions, rule of thumb is we should be looking everywhere, and is our ambition closer to 75+%? And if it's not, have we looked, enough? Are we being ambitious enough? That sometimes, obviously makes folks nervous. I've heard all kinds of things from clients saying, especially in distribution, where there's okay, you think we can double our margins, show me another company. And then I showed them, half of you guys, because I think there are some distributors that are able to really achieve some impressive margins in the space. But I just wonder, especially sitting where you sit and thinking about the organization, what is the sort of appetite for the ambition, and how big do you think it sort of needs to be to drive what you would call transformational change?
I do think that ambition needs to be set at the top. As Dolores said earlier, that tone at the top is really important. But the ambition of an organization, I think, also depends a lot on the risk appetite of that organization. You can't have really huge ambition, but you're really risk averse. You don't want to take on any of the risk, but you want to get a lot of high returns. So I do think that knowing what is the risk appetite of your organization, I think is really, really helpful. But having said that, I am a very big fan of bold ambitions. We have got leaders in our organization that are setting, very, very high ambition at the moment, that on the face of it, you're like, oh, how you would actually get there. But it's actually a really powerful tool to motivate the organization as well. I remember about 5 years ago in our global conference, our global CEO said that he want to double our business, within the next 10 years. And we're all like, well, that's good PR, but don't link that to my budget. And little did you know it, we did it. We managed to do it. We managed to deliver it. So it can be really powerful. But organizationally, we do set our kind of strategy and our vision kind of 3 years out, and then you work backwards and say, okay, what does it mean I have to do in the next 12 months? I think the most important thing about that ambition and that pace of change these days is agility. That used to be a key differentiator for a leader, for a business, but I do think that now it's just table stakes. So for me, it's about setting your ambition, setting your goals, but be prepared to adapt.
Yeah, and so a lot of the companies that we work with, when we do a pricing initiative, their goal is to improve their margin by 2 to 4 margin points. And a lot of them do achieve that. And I would say that's a pretty ambitious goal. That distributors, typical distributor is 4 to 6% net profit. And, setting that very ambitious goal is a good starting point. And generally, it evolves over a multi-year period. It doesn't happen in 1 year or, 6 months. But what you need is quick wins, early results, things that you can celebrate and talk about and really build the momentum to keep going. Because any meaningful change management initiative that's going to have ambitious goals that you reach really has to be a multi-year journey. And you definitely need the early and quick wins, celebrations. And on the flip side, though, it's important not to declare victory too early. That can be a problem, and kind of keeping or taking your eye off the ball, which can be very dangerous. It is, again, anything that can have that type of meaningful impact really requires that sustained attention that you talked about. And definitely have to view it as a long-term journey in order for it to be lasting and impactful.
I guess to that point, we talked about capability building, and I know it's one of the key metrics to sustainment. It's culture and capability building, right? Transformation is fundamentally asking, who do we want to be? And you want it to really be frontline led. We want everyone along with the journey. And you want to, not sort of go back, right, at the end of that 3 years. How do you think about that part, right? Skill building, the people, maintaining that momentum at the, in year 3. What does that look like for you?
I think we're getting increasingly mindful at the moment of change fatigue, right? The uncertainty that we have heard in the last 24 hours here, the uncertainty that we all live and experience every day means that people are pretty tired of change. And you're at home, you're dealing with changes, you go to work, you're dealing with changes. So I do think that having the fresh energy injecting into your change plan, be it 2 years, be it 3 years, is really important. To not make that assumption. I think so many times we make that assumption that things are still going along at the great pace of the first 6 months, but actually that's when all the fatigue kicks in, and that's when you're not as effective. So back to having clear KPIs, having clear roadmaps, and how is it that you can introduce that energy in? What are the celebration in terms of early victory that you can do to sustain that pace? I do think that the talent that you have in your organization is hugely important. Having that good mix of experience, but also an outsider view, I think is really key to transformation. So to make sure that you're fully aware of your blind spots, and then you have someone else to help you to overcome them.
Yeah, I agree. The outside expertise can be very helpful in guiding companies through that journey. And I agree, it's totally important to have that outside perspective to keep the energy going, and also to invest in the people with training and tools, and always remember that it's the people who are going to make the change and maintain the change, and understanding that change requires new skills. I think distribution is a little bit behind other industries in terms of training their people. I think it can be an afterthought. It can be, especially when it comes to the sales force, and not investing. And that is something that can really, I think, help to maintain and sustain the momentum by showing team members that you're willing to invest in them, to give them the skills that they need to maintain the improvements and to continue to improve.
And another question here, because I know a lot of folks in the room are both run large public organizations, but also a lot of privately held and family companies. And so when you think about change, and I've to some extent seen it both ways, when you look at a privately held or family-owned business that perhaps doesn't have the pressure of quarterly reports and at least public investors, and a lot of very large family companies have a board, and there's a bit I'm sure of a perspective that's there. Does transformation, the pace of change, what it looks like, does it look different for a public company than it may look like for a privately held or family-owned business? I think that's, especially relevant in the distribution sector.
I think it actually can work both ways. I think in a large organization, you have a lot more, processes and compliance that you have to follow. While in a smaller business, you can be more agile. You can move a bit faster and you can actually be bolder. You also could, I think there's potentially more appetite to invest more in the longer term and not having to manage the result every 3 months as a public company does, and don't have, your sort of next 12 months budget or forecast that you are tied to. So in many ways, there are kind of plus and minuses of being a family-owned businesses as well as being a public company. We are really acquisitive at Bunzl, and we tend to buy very successful family-owned businesses. And it's always amazing to see how those businesses go through transformations, because many times actually they are much better at in the old days, transformation is what you do, a big bang once every 5 years, every 10 years now, right? Now transformation is actually how do you change every day. So every day you need to do this continuous improvement, and every day as leaders, we need to continue on this transformation journey. And I think many of the family-owned businesses are really great at that.
I would agree with that. Really, the ownership that you see in family-owned businesses, that entrepreneurial spirit, their willingness to take risks and take chances, I think really plays out well for a lot of family-owned businesses. But I think there's a flip side to that. Something that I see quite a bit more often in smaller businesses, family-owned businesses, is a tendency to DIY. And not, reach out to partners who have experience that might be able to guide them through the change process. And they spend a lot of time learning things that maybe they could have gotten some help along the way.
That's right. And I have one last question, and then I think we probably have time for one or two more from the audience. I see them coming in here on the iPad. So one last question, and it's also a little short story. So I'm working with a very large global distributor, and we had been serving them in Europe for a while. And there's they also have gone through acquisition. We helped them with the turnaround in Europe, and then we've been working with them in North America most recently. And in North America, they have a couple businesses that are doing pretty well. They're working well. They said, hey, go take a look. Let us know if you sort of think that there's some opportunity. And so we've been doing the diligence, and in their minds, it's like, okay, we're move a couple points of EBIT, hopefully, or sustain. The market's looking a little soft. What do we do with it? And so I'm driving to the airport with the CEO, and he looks at me and he's like, listen, these businesses are not burning like some of the others. We think there's opportunity. We see the number; it looks pretty big. And he just asked me. He says, "Do you think this is a transformation?" That was a good question, right? Do I think it's a transformation, or should it just be, a strategic, plan that we launch versus should we do this in a transformational way? And I can tell you maybe at the end how I responded to him, but I'm just wondering, when you think about your organizations or the companies that you work with, when is it a transformation versus when is it just, part of our operating model, whether it's ambitious or not?
I think that there's a difference between the incremental changes and the transformation. I think for you to think about it as a transformation, there needs to be risk involved, but also there needs to be a fundamental change in how you do things and how you think about things, or the cultural aspect of an organization. So I'll give you an example. For me, and we've about 3 or 4 years ago, we launched sort of Power BI across the organization, so people are not just going to rely on Excel. It could have been an incremental change. You swap one tool to another, but it was a transformation because we get people to think differently about relying on data to make decisions and not their guts. So you can take it incremental change and convert it into a transformation if you're ambitious enough with the end goal.
I would agree with that. The transformation is, something that is big and impactful, and it's made up of little changes that add up to something that can really make a difference in a business.
Yeah. No, I think that's spot on. And I think where we ended the conversation was more around if the ambition in North America is to create a platform for true growth and to build out the full North America, then we have an opportunity for this to be transformational. Bring together these companies, bringing together synergies, creating a culture that's very aligned, and then setting up the organization for success. And so we're still thinking through that. I think we have dinner tonight, but you guys have given me some tips and tricks on how we should really think through it. So thank you both to Dolores and Katie for indulging me for a little bit. And so I think we have time for one or two more questions that came from the group. And this one is a good one because it's one that we had talked about as well, which is the role of technology in transformation. And we often sort of hear that, oh, we can't do that until technology hits, right? We need those investments, right? Obviously in distribution, every dollar truly matters. Return on invested capital, huge metric that you don't think about. So in the transformation, what's the role of tech? How much do you really sort of think that it is a enabler versus what can get done from your experience, somewhere in between? And so that's kind of or is there, as they describe, low-hanging fruit that we can get without technology?
I definitely think that technology is not crucial in all changes or transformation. Technology is hugely important, but as long as it's led by strategy. So you start with your strategy first. You start with the goal and the aim of the transformation, and the technology become a part of the how you get there. But there's been sometimes we fall in the trap of keeping up with the Joneses. I want the newest tool and not really have that aligned to actually meet your needs. So it's more hinder than help.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think it's important not to adopt technology for technology's sake. The classic example of implementing CRM before you have a sales process. And so really remembering that technology is available to everyone. Eventually, everyone is going to, have that technology, but what can really be a differentiator is, the stuff that people do that machines can't do, and really investing in the people and using that as your advantage, and not over-relying on technology, which is important, but it's not, the solution, the complete solution. People, I think, are the most important part of the equation.
Yeah, I agree. And I will say, a lot of my experiences when we're kind of building out the roadmap, to your point, let's focus on quick wins, kind of getting them on the board. Often that may not necessarily need the full technology, but it's certainly really thinking about that tech roadmap and integrating it into the transformation, I think, is key. Even if it sort of gives organizations some confidence that some of these investments are being made, right, as they sort of drive change, it's sort of in a smart way. And so it's really kind of how do we align that planning in a reasonable way to just kind of make sure the tools are in place across the transformation. And here's one more question. It's our last one. I don't even know if I should ask it. It's it's an interesting one, but I'll go ahead and ask it. So how do you keep the ownership of the transformation within the company and avoid people looking to consulting firms as the decision maker? Last question.
It comes down to the ownership. That is and the leadership. That's the role of the leadership, to kind of draw that line, to explain why are we bringing in the experts, so that we don't have to reinvent the wheel. We're going to go to somebody who's done this thousands of times, not doing it the first time. And then really kind of drawing the line and saying, this is what our organization owns, and this is what the consultant brings to the table, and really taking full advantage of that. But at the end of the day, owning your own initiative, owning your own transformation, I think, is the way to do that.
Yeah. I think it goes back to that why that we talked about earlier.
Yeah.
You know, do people fully understand the why and have the conviction to own it and that pride as well. You know, you're not going to have the same level of pride of achievement if it turned out that a consulting company have been the key decision maker there. So that, and maybe show them the per hour billing. That may help.
Yeah. I don't know if we do per day. I don't know if we do per hour.
What do you think, Brooke? Like, just, you know, since you work, you know, in consulting, what's your view? I'm interested to hear.
Yeah, no, I certainly, so I think one thing, it's where we started, right? I think change is hard, right? And so for a lot of organizations where we kind of come in, I mean, there's a couple of roles that we play. We can never own the initiatives. That is just not the role that the consultant plays. Like, that has to come from the organization and that planning. I think we often find that there is a level of discipline where it makes sense to often have someone who can support you. And those statistics that we saw, are we ready before day one? Are we kind of clear on the ambition? Do we have a change story for the organization? Let's not skip the step, right, when it comes to planning. Do we need a TO? Who should it be? Should it be a finance person? Do we change the org structure while we're doing this? So some of these really big questions that I think sometimes organizations, when you're still running the business, like fundamentally on top of really trying to change the organization, there is sort of benefit to having some support in helping you do that. But if it comes down to the point where you don't build the capabilities, right? You don't have the buy-in. A lot of people get concerned, like when we kind of come in, is it slash and burn and cutting? The reality is a good transformation, half of it is cost, half of it is growth, right? Yeah. It really should be fundamentally about both. And so I certainly think that, you know, the distribution sector will be one in which we're going to continue to see innovation, you know, whether we talk about digital or talk about even supply chain. On the growth side, I've seen a number of distributors even thinking about, do I shift the core in terms of the products, what my customers are requiring, et cetera. It's going to be an incredible journey, I think, for the sector, and excited to continue to talk about transformation and switch the odds, right? So we go from less than 7 out of 10 who sort of say we didn't really hit the mark to a lot more. And I think this is an industry that certainly can lead the way in doing that. And so with that, I say thank you both for the time, and thank you all for attending. Thank you to Katie and Dolores.
Thank you.